Welcome to the Claire Trevor School of the Arts and the Claire Trevor Theater. I'm Stephen Barker. I have the double pleasure of being the Dean of the School of the Arts and also the Executive Director of a little project that we're engaged on the campus at the moment, the creation of what is going to be the great Institute and Museum for California Art. We will be the World Center for the Study of and the Exhibition of California Art. We've been showing examples. We've been showing examples of one of our collections, but I want to give you just a 10-second history of how this came about. A couple of years ago, we were lucky enough to have visit the campus one of our great supporters. He's sitting right down there. Wave, James. James Irvine Swindon. Who, along with his mother and grandmother, have been collecting over 3 generations, really one of the world's great collections of California Impressionism and plein air art. Those works, I was told, were now, it's about time they're coming to UCI. And so we inherited 1,400 of the greatest works of California Impressionism. The same week, I was informed that local developer, Gerald Buck, had willed us 3,700 works of California art that he'd been collecting over 30 years. So literally, over the course of 1 week's time, we found ourselves in possession of well over 5,000 works of really great California art in 2 and 3 dimensions. When I took this information to the Chancellor's office and said, look what we've got, the Chancellor said, well, what the heck are we going to do with it? And was perfectly willing to be told that what we were going to do with it was to create the place in the world to come and experience, to come and to look into, and to have a dialogue with the history and the current state, meaning all the way up into the future of California art. And so you need to know that the Irvine Museum collection, for which Jim has been responsible, has been on show for 25 years at the Irvine Museum, which is in the circular building over on Von Karman near the airport. Does 3 shows a year of absolutely brilliant work. Another one is coming soon. Please keep your ears open and your eyes open on our website for the next show of the Irvine Museum at the University of California, Irvine, which will be opening soon. But we, of course, felt that it was also very important for us to give the world the first glimpse of some works from the Buck collection because, ironically enough, Mr. Buck, in his 30-some years of collecting, had gathered work from California artists, from various galleries, from auction houses, etc., collected them, put them in cases and crates, and put them away. When we received this work, there had never been an exhibition of the Buck collection. There had never been a book done on the Buck collection. And so we had the opportunity to give the first glimpse, I keep repeating that phrase, of works from the Buck collection. 3 of us, myself, Kevin Appel, wave Kevin, the chair of UCI's art department, and Cecile Whiting, UCI's chair of art history, got together, and the 3 of us, mostly Kevin, I have to confess, curated this show, the show that you have, I hope, seen in the 2 galleries in the school, the Contemporary Art Center Gallery and the University Art Gallery, both of which are open till 6 today. So please feel free to visit again and have a further look at the works that we put on the wall. Keep in mind that these 2 galleries are showing 49 works from the Buck collection out of 3,700 works. So we still have a ways to go to get the Buck collection out to you. I will also point out to you that there are 3 exciting events happening today on campus. One is the tours of the galleries. The highlight is what we're about to experience here in the theater. And the third is that today is the launch of the book that we have done on not only the first exhibition, First Glimpse, but the 49 works in that collection plus 100 more. So the book that is on sale outside these doors at the reception area where you are welcome to have something to eat or drink after the show and have a look at the book is on sale for $60. a very, very reasonable price. We hope very much that you will come back and see further exhibitions that we'll be doing over the course of time. I encourage you to keep your eyes and ears on our IMCA website, because that's where the information will be. And so, without further ado, I'm going to introduce three really terrific California artists to you. I have the privilege of only introducing one of them, Gisela Colon, who is sitting in the middle. She, I'll take your line away from you. She is the ham in the sandwich today. Gisela is a fabulous artist in her own right. Please have a look at her website. You'll see some absolutely remarkable work that she has been doing, very much in keeping with a number of the genres of work that are on display in our two galleries now. Gisela is someone who was born in Canada, grew up in Puerto Rico, now lives in Los Angeles. She has a BA and a JD, so she is actually able to write her own contracts, and I hope she never has to sue herself. This would not be good. And so what we have in the center of the group on stage is really a remarkable opportunity for you to hear Gisela talking to two of the great artists in our collection. And so without further ado, I pass the microphone on to Gisela Colon, who will introduce our speakers for the day. Thank you.
Well, it really is a pleasure and an honor to be here today. So thank you, Dean Stephen Barker, for having me. Thank you, Kevin Appel, for reaching out. I really appreciate it. And before we start, I just want to acknowledge the presence of some wonderful artists in the audience that are really good friends, and I'm just so delighted to have them here today. Dwayne Valentine up in the back. Let's have a hand for Dwayne. A Western pioneer and cowboy, right? And Eric Johnson, who's been a dear friend for many years. And he taught me how to wield a spray gun. And Kelly Berg, Andy Moses, Stephanie Bacciero. So it's really great to have everybody here and all of you. And now I'm just going to give you a quick bio of each of the artists, and then we can get into the meat of it. So Tony DeLap was born in Oakland in 1927. He has lived and worked in Orange County since 1965. Tony and John Copeland, who was the founder of Artform, were the founding faculty members in 1965 of the UCI Irvine Art Department, where Tony taught for 26 years until 1991. DeLap served as the project consultant for Best Kept Secret, UCI and the Development of Contemporary Art in Southern California from 1964 to 1971, which was part of the Getty Foundation's Pacific Standard Time Initiative, and it was shown at the Laguna Art Museum, which was an incredible show of that period in time, which we're going to cover today. And Tony is unique in that he has been associated with not one, but many of the dominant trends of late 20th century abstractions, such as minimalism, op art, primary structures, hard edge painting, and site-specific sculpture. Though he has been linked to all of the major movements of the 1960s, his work intentionally eludes categorization. And this I'm paraphrasing Barbara Rose, who did a wonderful essay on his work. And his objects take time to understand, process, and experience. He met with much early success. His work was included in major landmark exhibitions in New York, such as The Responsive Eye in 1965 at MoMA, Primary Structures in 1966 at the Jewish Museum in New York, and in Los Angeles in American Sculpture of the 60s in 1967 that was held at LACMA. His work resides in the permanent collections of the Tate in London, MoMA New York, Guggenheim, the Whitney, San Francisco MoMA, LACMA, the Hirshhorn in DC, the Albright Knox, Hammer Los Angeles, the Walker, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's an incredible honor to be here. And now, turning to Laddie John Dill. Laddie John Dill was born in Long Beach, California in 1943. He graduated from Chouinard Art Institute in 1968 with a BFA, and after graduating, he became a printing apprentice for GEMINI Gel and worked closely with established artists like Robert Rauschenberg, Klaus Oldenburg, Roy Lichtenstein, and Jasper Johns. He had his first solo exhibition in New York City with the Illeanna Sonnabend Gallery in 1971, and he was one of the first Los Angeles artist to exhibit light and space work in New York. Laddie's work is in the permanent collection of institutions such as MoMA, New York, LACMA, California, MoCA, Los Angeles, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the High Museum in Georgia, the Phillips Collection, the Chicago Art Institute, the Smithsonian, the Museo Jumex, and also the list goes on and on. He currently lives in Venice, California, where he maintains a studio. So anyway, without further ado, let's welcome these two masters of minimalism. And to start, oh, there's Tony. Look, two pictures, one when he's young and the other one when he's younger. And here's Laddie in his studio. And the first interesting subject that I think is really seminal to this area is the UCI in the 1960s. And the picture on the screen is back when UCI was first developed, what it looked like from above with barely any architecture, barely any construction all around it. So Tony, do you want to talk about the 60s and UCI when you first joined in 65, how it was?
Well,
you don't have to.
The first contact I had about the possibility of coming here was from John Copeland, who was an artist critic who had come in from London and to San Francisco, and I met him there, and then it happened that we both were teaching a class at the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, and became friends with that, with the teaching over there. And then John was also involved with Art for magazine, which the magazine started in San Francisco by an advertising gentleman who I never did meet, but I understand was not really in the art world. But anyway, he started Art Form, and then it quickly changed hands and spent a short period of time, the magazine did, in San Francisco before going to Los Angeles. And John was writing for Art Form, and through that goings on and all, we became quite good friends. So he, however, left San Francisco because it was not completely his interests. It was really more from the history of School of Painting, and had many fine, very well-known people through the years having taught there. But John was involved in a bit of the new that was going on in the 1960s. So he settled in Los Angeles at that time, and because he had liked my work, and we had talked a good deal about the art world and so forth, he asked me if I wanted to come down here and help him start the studio art department. And Kathy and I were recently married about that time, and I thought that with all of my interests in living in the Bay Area and loving, of course, San Francisco and what it had to offer, it would be probably closer to my art world, with a number of the younger artists in Los Angeles, such as Laddie, and a good number of the other artists, many of them younger than I was.
Now here I have a slide with all of the younger artists that you hired, right, Laddie? Like Craig Kaufman, Larry Bell. There's a picture of Laddie from the 70s, Laddie? From that would have been when you came to work at UCI? And Ed Moses.
So I came down here to UCI, and it was mainly a field for horses.
Cabbage.
Cabbage fields.
A lot of cabbage.
there was not much in the way of building. I think there were about 2 buildings, permanent buildings that were built. And anyway, I was reviewing some of the years and realized that it was 54 years ago that the school opened. And John Copens and I were the first ones to deal with the studio art department, and we were recognizing the names of so many of, or a number of the younger artists and all who were doing good work in Los Angeles. And so we got involved in the changes that were going on in the world of the contemporary art and what artists were doing after a World War, and having many of the great European artists come to the United States and contact with so many other parts of the world. It was a very exciting time, and we waited for some of the new buildings to be built to house the art that was to come. And I think that it was, for me, it was really a wonderful new experience. And we have gone on from there, and I think the school has developed into one of the major art schools, and brought forth many, many artists of California who were presenting new and original work, light and space, using new materials, all of this kind of thing. So much of it was coming out right here.
And were you, Tony, responsible for hiring most of these professors? You know, like Laddie, you hired Laddie, would be in 1970, right, or 71?
About
71.
Late 71.
Yes.
So did you hire, like, you know, work with Larry Bell?
Yes, we did. We John McCracken, who was my
Oh, yeah.
studio assistant in San Francisco. I first met him. He was in one of my art classes at the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, and he was, I could say, one of the major developers of fiberglass in the United States. Contrary to what a lot of people think, fiberglass came more out of California than it did out of New York. But that...
Was it a military declassification material?
I'm sorry?
Was it a material that was declassified by the military, you know, like resin?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
So Laddie, what do you remember from that era, 1970, when you first came here to UCI?
Well, in those days, you have to remember, tech was huge in Southern California. But I remember working at Irvine, and it was basically a place where it was really pushed for experimentation.
Innovation and experimentation.
That was experimentation, innovation, however you want to put it. It was that kind of atmosphere, plus the students were incredible.
Right. Well,
I mean,
here...
you could see the faculty, but...
yeah, here I have some of the students that attended: Chris Burden, Marcia Hafif, James Terrell, Nancy Buchanan, Alexis Smith. So do you remember teaching these students, working with them, like Chris Burden?
No, Chris was a graduate student, and so when I got there, I think he was doing his locker piece, which is, some of you are familiar with that. He locked himself in the top locker, then he had water on the top, right? He was in the middle, and then...
Right. And he did his infamous shooting piece. Here I have an image of his shooting. I think it was 1970, 71. Do you remember that, Tony?
Yeah, I'm sorry, who was that?
When Chris Burden shot himself here as
Oh,
part of a
shooting.
very much so. Yeah, it was in a it was in a small studios, well, the students had rented it
Right.
as a studio space, very close here to the campus, and
Yeah.
I wasn't there that particular time, which maybe is as well. But I do remember that.
Yeah, it was sort of a feeling of experimentation, pushing the limits, right?
Yeah,
At the time.
I think so. I remember one day I saw Chris outside here in the school someplace, and I said, Chris, I finally kind of put together who you remind me of. And he said, who's that? And I said, Harry Houdini. Because, you know, he was kind of doing similar things, and
He got himself out of the locker.
I'm sorry?
He got himself out of the locker.
He did, and it happened to have been my locker.
Right.
And I went into my class one day, and there was this noise in this, not a very big door in the studio, and some kind of growling on inside, you know. And I went over and opened the door, and here this guy is coming out of this locker, and I thought, well, you know, my goodness.
Right. That's fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, I remember one story. He ended up living in Venice down the street, and I get a knock on the door, and it's Chris, and he says, I've worked it all out. There's no pain. There might be a little blood, but I've worked it out a lot. I just want to ask you if you'll do me a favor. And I said, what is it, Chris? And he said, do you think you could take a 9-penny nail and nail me to a Volkswagen?
Oh my God. And did you do it?
No, I wouldn't do it. I think Chuck Arnoldi ended up doing it.
Oh, wow. Daring soul.
They were in the same building.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. And Tony, when you were here also in the early 70s, you performed a magic performance where you levitated a woman, and it was a UCI festival organized by Barbara Rose, the Duchamp Festival.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, you know, I was not teaching that quarter,
Right.
but I was here working, of course, in my own work, and Barbara Rose and Frank, her husband.
Eversley?
What?
Was he with Barbara? Yeah, he was. A long time ago.
Frank Stella.
Oh, yeah, she was married to Frank Stella.
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah.
And he was not teaching because, as I remember, he wouldn't pass the loyalty, or the loyalty oath for teaching, which you can't really blame him for because that's been long gone. But it also, I think, gave him an excuse to get a studio in Costa Mesa, which is up where I was and all. And so Barbara did attend and put on the festival. And I'd asked me if I would do something, and so I thought, well, I'll maybe levitate a live person, And so I did set up that feat or trick, I guess is a better word for it. And I did it in just one of the empty rooms here on the campus, and realized what a kind of controversy it brought forth, and kind of scared me a little bit, because I thought, well, many people believe this,
That you actually levitated the woman.
that I actually levitated a woman. So I
Well, didn't you?
Was it with a crane?
what?
A crane of some kind? A crane? Like a crane of some kind?
Oh, I can't tell you.
Oh, okay. I was always wondering. That's perceptualism. Well, that's wonderful. The whole magic thing, you know.
I found that theme was often more popular than my work. So I always found reason to do something of that sort for a show coming up.
Right, right. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you mentioned that early on you were attracted to the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright.
I was.
And you actually own one of the blocks, I believe, from his house in Pasadena, the
Yes.
Millard House.
Yes.
So when I look at that, I say, God, that just has such a dialogue with your early boxes. Was that an influence in your early work?
Well, I used to occasionally take the students up to the Millard House in, in Pasadena. And the gentleman who owned the house at that time was a very friendly fellow, and he was always happy to see students and so forth. So we always had a very good time in going up there. And at one time we went up, they were redoing the foundations of the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And I was told that they were using the original molds, which I believe had been made in wood, and they were recasting the concrete-like bricks that from new materials. Because I think the original materials that Wright used had a lot of salt in the sand and all.
Right.
And that's why
So were they crumbling? Were they crumbling?
They were crumbling. So this gentleman, I can't think of his name right at the moment, but who was running and taking care of the house, was selling these bricks to anyone that wanted one for, I think,
That's great.
$25 or something.
That's
about
great.
that.
So you still own it today?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But I was always very much a fan of Wright and what he not had only done in California, but in the United States. And I think that he was always a good example of one who was interested not only in architecture per se, but also in the arts.
In the arts.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask both of you about the architecture of William Pereira, which is the early UCI buildings, the original buildings. They are incredible in their modernism and their repetitive grid. And when I look at this, Laddie, I can't help but see your light sentences.
That's
you know?
unfortunate.
No. I see beauty in this. I really am a fan of Pereira, and I was wondering what you thought of when you first got here, what did you think of that architecture?
I didn't think about it at all.
You didn't think about
When
it?
I first got here, there was one building, and then the rest was lettuce or something. You know? So, I mean, even today, I had to look at the map
And just say, oh, wow.
Make a right, make a
Right.
left. So it's changed quite a bit.
It's changed quite a bit. And what about you, Tony? Did you enjoy the Pereira architecture when you were here?
No.
No? Nobody's a fan, huh? Okay, well. I'm a fan of Pereira.
You know, at one time, they did, I can't remember the name of the show, but they did a TV show where people from outer space were wandering around and so forth. And they used part of the school here, mainly the student work area and all, they used the architecture for one of those episodes.
As the backdrop for the
And
aliens.
I came to school that morning and saw a couple of these weird-looking people coming out. I didn't know for a few minutes what was going on, and then when I was told, I realized, well, they picked the perfect space.
Alien architecture, okay. So, Tony, you had a lot of early success. You were on the cover of Art Forums.
Yes.
And Donald Judd put you in his infamous essay,
Yes.
Specific Objects, which is a fantastic piece of writing. So did you ever meet Judd? How did you meet Judd?
Yeah, I think that maybe I had mentioned to you
Yeah.
that I never met him on any formal kind of a of an involvement, but our friends who lived in Pasadena had a art party one evening we were invited to, and he had come to the dinner, and I had met him there.
Okay.
But
okay.
I never, unfortunately for me, I never did have a conversation with him.
Well, he put you in his wonderful writing, which I believe, would you say that being on the cover of Art Forum and in Donald Judd's writings led to your initial shows in New York? Was that part of how the curators found you?
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay. Because you had, I mean, look at all the shows you were in. The MoMA 1965 Responsive Eye, which is an op art show of the premier op art show of the 60s. The Jewish Museum Primary Structures, of which you guys see on the screen, is that blue piece, raw, titled Ka, is so beautiful, Tony. I said, I almost cried when I saw it, just the curvature of it. And then he was also in the Whitney Biennale in 1966, which is an incredible exhibition. And if you guys see the slide where you see one of your twisted pieces, Tony, twisted pieces
Yes.
in the Whitney Biennale. And then also, if you look closely in the back of the picture is one of Dwayne's double discs in the image close by. So how did it feel, Tony? Did you go to New York for these shows? Did you visit? I mean, how were you?
I was kind of overwhelmed at first because I had been a native of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I had taken a good interest in, was involved a fair bit in what was going on there in the Bay Area. And then when I had an opportunity to work on a couple of these shows that were outside the area and all, I was a bit overwhelmed by some of it.
The magnitude,
for
I
me,
mean,
because I just wasn't, you know.
3 major shows.
Yeah, I remember I did some pieces that were double-sided, which had come from my paintings, where they were pretty much the same on both sides, but they existed in real space. And I remember when I showed one of those to, I can't remember his name now, but the critic from Chicago who was coming out looking for some work for one of his shows. I showed him this piece and I said, maybe you would like something like this. And he said, I couldn't put that in my show if my life depended on it.
Oh my God.
You know.
So it was one of the double-sided boxes?
Yeah, it was and it was not really a painting, nor was it, you know.
Right, a hybrid.
And so it was, in a way, it was kind of exciting to go through to go through a lot of that, but at the same time, I was not, I guess, too good at handling it all.
Well, it's amazing that you had all of that, so it's wonderful. And then Laddie, I want to just turn to you for a little bit and talk about the GEMINI connection. Laddie's entree into New York was through the GEMINI Gel people, and you started working for them, and you met a whole bunch of these amazing artists. Maybe you want to just tell us how that happened?
Well, first of all, I think I'm lucky even today to be on the same stage with Tony and Gisela, actually. Both, I'm a huge admirer of both of them.
Thank you.
And I have to mention one thing. When you used to show with Nick, I've always followed you, sort of like, you're the one that hired me for UCI, and then before that, you were showing with Nick Wilder, or working with Nick, whatever. I was his chauffeur when I was in art school. I went to Chenard, and which is now Cal Arts, and that's what I did to make money. You know. So I learned a lot, probably more than I did at Chenard, actually. But I've been very, very lucky. I started at GEMINI just as an apprentice printer, and I was able to work with Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg and Roy Lichtenstein and Klaus Oldenburg and Frank Stella. So I met all these guys, and at the same time I was doing my own work downtown, and through knowing all these people, working for them actually, I got to be pretty good friends with Bob Rauschenberg, and he asked me if I would do a collaboration with him up on this hill above Culver City. And I mean, this is in 1968, and so, you know, Bob was at the top of his pile right at that point, and you just don't turn things like that down. So I went up there and I dug a bunch of holes in the ground and dropped neon sticks down into these holes, so you saw these lozenges of color going across the landscape.
Did it look like that, Laddie? In the sand? No?
Not quite like
Not
that.
quite, not
Yeah,
quite.
that's a little weird. No, I don't have any photographs of that.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it was successful because of the GEMINI thing, and so I'm waiting for Bob to call again. You know, like, let's do another one. You know, he does call, and he said, "I'll do you a favor. Instead of doing the collaboration, I'll just bring my dealer over," and which he did. There was an Andy Warhol show at the Pasadena Art Museum, so the whole New York art world was in LA for a week or so, and he brought over the Sonnabends, and they offered me a show.
And they did a studio visit with you?
Yeah.
In which you had, did you have all the sand in the studio and everything?
Well, my studio consisted of, it was about the size of this stage, actually, but I had 7,000 pounds of sand in it that I just used as a kind of a, now you can show it.
Yeah.
I just used as a palette, and then, of course, the requisite bed in the corner and all that. Anyway, I did this light piece with the sand, and I was always in motion. You know, because of the traffic outside. This is in downtown LA. It was always vibrating. You know, so I was always working on this piece. And when Rauschenberg came, he said, "Boy, I really like this piece. I would get this piece, but I have cats." So
That's pretty funny.
Unfortunate.
That's pretty funny. And then you had your first show in New York at Sonnabend in 1971.
I went to New York, and I got to New York, and Mark DeSuvero, the sculptor, had visited my studio, and he gave me the key to his studio because he knew I was going to New York, and it was like the first show was in February, of course, and there was a blizzard. This is no cell phones or anything like that. And we get to the Mark's studio, and you have to climb up a rope, not a rope ladder, but a rope, you know, like you, and then swing yourself into the room itself, and you're surrounded by these giant sculptures that he made, but had no plan on ever figuring out how it was going to leave the building. So I think in the long run, what he did was buy the building and tear out the wall and have them removed. You know? So I had all these great experiences like that. So the person I was with, my girlfriend at the time actually, refused to stay at Mark's because there was no heat. So I said, okay. So, you know, went downstairs to the phone booth and called the only other people I knew in town. First on the list was Jasper Johns, you know. These are the kind of things you do when you're like 25 years old, you know. Do them now. Anyway, I called Jasper and I got his secretary, and she said he was out of town. And I said, well, I was just wondering if he had any leads on any places I should stay. And she said, well, she called me back. I'm waiting in the phone booth, you know. And she said, come by and get the key. He said, stay there. So I stayed at Jasper Johns's for about a month.
Wow.
And he finally came back. He was away. He was down in South Carolina, which is where I think he's from, actually. And so I, you know, just in and out. He had the most incredible studio I've ever seen. It was a 100-year-old bank building on the corner of Essex and Houston, next to Katz's Deli, and on the Lower East Side. And you walk in, and of course all the Teller things were gone, but it was like this beautiful thing. He had the best John Chamberlain I've ever seen, the best Cy Twombly I've ever seen, you know. So I consider myself extremely lucky that I was like seeded into this group like that, because these guys drank, and it was bourbon at Rauschenberg's and scotch at Jasper's, but his regular friends would come by around 5 o'clock, and his regular friends consisted of like John Cage, Merce Cunningham, Buckminster Fuller, Lane de Kooning, and some museum director, and they were like regulars over there, you know. Mm-hmm. So I have this show at Sonnabend, and they all show up, you know. So
pretty
that
amazing.
was a nice entree into
And
New
then,
York.
Laddie, these sand pieces that you were working on with the glass, I think you and I were talking, and you said that a lot of the use of the sand and everything comes from your influence from Rauschenberg, his use of dirt.
Using materials that
Smithson, right?
Rauschenberg once told me that his point was to use diverse materials and combine them, thus the combine. But,
right.
But every material, if you look at a Rauschenberg, is actually identifiable in its own connotation. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, so it's a combination of these connotations.
Connotations, and also you mentioned Smithson as being an influence, the use of dirt for your sand pieces.
And the earth artists, and Art Povera, and all that was going on at that time.
Yeah.
So I started working with sand. Actually, the first pieces were the neon pieces.
Okay.
The light
in the
sentences,
sand. Oh, the light sentences.
Then the sand pieces.
Yeah, here's a light sentence. Look how beautiful. So how did you get the thing to light up? What kind of gases did you use?
That particular one is, that's argon with mercury. Mm-hmm. And I just got into the science of the gases and the high voltage and low amperage. And,
right.
you know, just lived in that world for a while.
But now
actually,
these glass
the guy
tubes,
that turned me on to it was Bob Irwin over here.
Yeah, yeah.
And this guy named Rio Score. It's a name you never forget.
About what time was that?
It's like 72 or something like that. He just happened to be on campus. I don't know if he was teaching regularly there at that time. But he's the one, I remember it was here, that he said, you got to go check out this guy, Rio Score. And so I went and checked him out, and I've been working, then he passed away, unfortunately, but I've been working in their hot shop since then. I'm still working with them.
So you hand blow the little pieces?
Yeah, the little
segments?
The segments. I call them light sentences because you cut the thing, with a three-sided file and snap it. And then for one like that, I didn't want to get confused, because when they're off, they're just like...
Did the pieces with the sand come about that same time?
Same time. Just right. It's almost hard to separate them as different times.
And the sand pieces have the gas and the edge of the glass rather than inside, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So it's kind of the edge of it, which makes it glow.
One. Yeah. So when I was offered the show at Sonnabend, I hadn't made that piece yet. I was just still working on it.
Right. So you what did you show at Sonnabend? The dirt pieces, light sentences?
No, then I worked out the sand piece and showed it in New York in 71, and then had a lot of luck with that show.
That's great.
People like Dick Bellamy bought a piece, and DeSuvro, and so it was really a good entree into New York. And in those days, New York was still, it was publishing capital of the world. So,
Yeah.
you know, the magazines and all that, you know, came out of, although I still teach at Otis right now. I ban art magazines in my class because they all look so slick.
Well, that's
I agree with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
interesting.
Anyway, then,
And then MoMA eventually acquired one of your sand pieces,
yeah,
which I just had up a minute
years
ago.
later, you know, 2010, there was a light and space show that actually it was a little wider definition of that. McCracken was in it.
Was it Primary Atmospheres?
Yeah, Primary
David Zwerner, yeah,
Atmospheres, yeah,
2010.
at David Zwerner's.
Right.
And that's when MoMA bought a piece, and you know, so what they bought were 5 pieces of glass, a long argon tube, and 7,000 pounds of sand.
Wow, that's
And-
wonderful.
So I thought, well, they're going to buy it, yeah, but they'll never show it. You know. But actually, 2 years later, they actually asked me to come over and do it, and it was one of the best experiences of my life is working with those guys at MoMA.
That's great,
And they were
that's
cool.
great. And they let you reconstruct at variable dimensions completely.
Yeah. It's a site-specific piece.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So back in LA, Nicholas Wilder, you guys mentioned him earlier, and then Tony, you showed with Nicholas Wilder. Well, you were the chauffeur.
I was a chauffeur. I was a chauffeur for a while. Before that, there was another chauffeur, but Nick had a tendency to take mescaline. And the other chauffeur freaked out over it. Didn't take mescaline, but I mean, the fact that Nick was back there. When I was driving for Nick, his favorite thing was to take some mescaline and then I'd drive him around town with the theme from Romeo and Juliet movie. You know, I mean, he was a pretty eccentric guy. But you have to understand, he also was the guy who discovered Bruce Nauman. And,
Right.
And
all of the greats, yeah. And
showed
Laddie.
Tony, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, he was a
Yeah.
forward thinker.
Yeah, and here
Unfortunately-
there's a picture of Tony with Nick Wilder and Craig Kaufman in the gallery up on
Yeah.
the screen.
My mind has just gone blank. Who was the artist that Nick showed who was up at Davis?
Well, there was actually Nauman.
Nauman.
Yeah, Bruce Nauman came
Bruce
out of
Nauman.
Davis. Yeah.
And one day, when I was still in San Francisco, was working there, Nick was still at Stanford. And
Right.
he came by one day to see what I was doing and all, which occasionally he did. And he was working for off time for Dr. Fielder, who was Stanford, one of the well-known physicians for Stanford. And he and his wife had an art gallery in Palo Alto. And they asked Nick to run it. So Nick ran it, and then they didn't understand when Nick left why they didn't have any more business. You know.
Nick could talk a painting really good.
So anyway, in those early years, Nick would occasionally drop by my studio to see what I was doing and all. And one day, the studio was separate from the house, and he went into the upstairs to use the facilities, I believe, and he was there quite a while. And he came back down and he said, "What is that ungodly thing that's hanging on your wall?" You know, he said, it's unbelievable. And I said, "Well, it's a student by the name of Nauman, who is up at UC Davis, where I was teaching then 2 days a week." And so he said, "Well, I've never seen anything as awful as that." You know, and went on. So about 2 weeks later, he came by again, and he said, "You know, do you still have that thing that was hanging on the wall the last time I saw it?" And I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Well, I'm going to go see it again." So he went back upstairs and stayed a while and came back down, and he said, he said, I've been thinking about things, and he said, can I meet this guy? And I said, yeah. I said, I go to Davis 2 days a week. And I said, Tuesday and Thursday, and any day you want to go up with me on those days, I'll introduce you to him. So anyway, I did that, and he met Bruce Nauman, and that's how they got together. And then it was a short time after that Nick opened his gallery in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were really 3 galleries that were prominent. There was Ferris, which most of you probably know about. And then there was Nick. And then Rico Mizuno opened. I showed with her for a while. And that was...
Virginia Dwan, too.
Virginia Dwan over in Westwood, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Doug Christmas. Mm-hmm. So it was a small scene. It was a very small scene. And we were the West Coast in those days. Obviously, it's very different now.
Very different. And here's a vintage picture of Tony standing in Nick Wilder's gallery in one of your early shows there with the shaped pieces. So I was wondering, Tony, if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to this idea of the edge, beveling the edge, making the edge mysterious. What drove you to all of this?
I actually remember it fairly well. I had this studio in Costa Mesa, and I had been doing sculpture and all at that moment, or that time. And then I made a painting without the edge, or at least the cut back edge. And it was a painting about so big. And I had it hanging in the studio, and I was by myself, and I looked at it. I thought, this is maybe one of the most uninteresting things I've ever seen. And so I cut back the edge and did what I had then from that point on done to many paintings coming about. But there was a gentleman on the other side of where my studio was, who was he was a maker in wood for testing new materials and that kind of thing. And he was just very good at what he did. So I went over and saw him and talked to him about this, and he did some things for me showed me about what I could do on the wood. Anyway, on that piece, I cut it back. I cut back the edge. And when I came back and had performed that a bit, I looked at it and thought that this is okay. It's something that maybe I can begin to develop. And that's how the edge came about, plus the fact that I liked the idea that as you moved across it, it would change.
Yeah. Right, which is the whole concept of movement.
Right? It moved on me.
It moved on you. Yeah, because I see in a lot of your pieces inherent or implied movement. I mean, you have to walk around the piece to really experience it. And from every angle.
I like the time span, or the time lapse, or whatever.
The time lapse,
and it was like a Mobius band. It started out and ended up
turn on itself.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I love the floating lady at ACMA, which I just put a picture up. It's amazing. How did you think of this?
Well, that was typical of the edge. I mean, that edge came from the paintings.
Right.
And it's actually an architectural term or usage. And the thing that I found interesting about it, as architects did, was that twist, apparent twist in the surface of the continuous plane is made out of straight material.
Straight material.
In other words, it's not cut and twisted to that shape.
Right.
It takes that shape in going from a triangle to a square.
Right, and I was reading a lot about this, and I thought, they always use the term illusionism because they link it to the magic, but I don't think it's illusionism. What you're looking at is reality. It's simply a perceptual experience that you have to, as the viewer, get engaged to see it. So I would call your work really perceptualism rather than illusionism.
I see what you're saying, yes.
It's a real, it's not an illusion what you're looking at, it's the reality.
Thank you.
So I'm coming towards the end here, and my last slide, I have both of your works up side by side, and I thought, what a beautiful dialogue. Both of you are from California originally, and both of you have tackled what they call minimalism in different ways, and yet there's such beauty and balance in the work. And I just love juxtaposing these two pieces because I thought they really look beautiful together. And I just thought if you have any parting thoughts about beauty or balance or anything that you want to mention.
Laddie, I think the first time I met you was at the Jack Glenn Gallery.
Oh yeah, Jack Glenn.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say I forgot. Early influences, of course, were like John's and Rauschenberg, but my stepfather was a lens designer and a mathematician, and just a brilliant guy. Not a great dad, but he still. And so he was one of the developers of the green and black night vision. And I remember as a kid wearing this thing held together with duct tape but you could see in the dark. It was amazing. So I grew up in a house that had laser beams running down the hallway and then splitting off into 5 directions.
Right.
Don't touch this or you'll die. It was all that kind of thing. So when I first, I started out at Chouinard, you sort of have to make it up almost, and I very quickly turned to the quality of light. Mm-hmm. And I think it was from those memories of light going down
the hallway.
And I'm still in love with it, just the way it looks alive.
Right, and look at the edge on that glass piece. It's just fantastic. It's almost like a laser.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, it's important. Very important. Very important.
I also have to mention that I was always amazed by Tony's craftsmanship. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I was over at the show just this morning, and I still, was the one that has the edgeless, it just kind of folds around the back and everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, how the hell did he do that?
Well,
sleight of hand.
It's a funny thing about how we often have such different ideas about what we want to do when we grow up. But I remember within myself somewhat always agitated by in school, if it was a shop class, I wanted to take that, and if it was an art class, I wanted to take the art class. But I couldn't take them both at the same time, wherever I was. So when I took one, I felt guilty because I wasn't taking the other one,
Where'd you go to school?
It's funny I think it's funny about some of those kind of things. You just, it's all very personal and all, but at the same time, for a young person, it can sort of make a mess out of you.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, where did you say you went to school?
Well, I went to the grade schools and all in Richmond, the Richmond school system.
Uh-huh.
And then when I finished high school, I was kind of waiting for that draft bit, and then the war was over. And so I went, I went a couple years to Menlo Junior College, which was down by Stanford. And that was interesting for me for some of the people I met, but it was just not my interest. So I was taking art classes 2 days a week at a little place in San Francisco, the California School of, the California School of Art, I guess. And what became that very large school that is now in San Francisco that you had, I forget what it's called. At any rate, that was the beginnings.
You mean the Art
The
Institute?
Institute.
Yeah.
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 That was the beginning of that school, run by Dick Stevens Jr.'s father, who was an old San Francisco, one of the early painters in San Francisco, and he started the school. And now young Dick, who made that a huge enterprise. He had gone to Stanford and became a very slick businessman, and he turned that school into a major goings on. But I think he died last year.
Were you there during the time of, say, Jay DeFeo?
I'm sorry?
Jay DeFeo?
Yes.
She was up there when you were up there?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And also Bob Irwin was up there at that time, I think.
I'm sorry, who?
Robert Irwin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were all like Bay Area.
I didn't know that group too well because I was, I really didn't get deeply into the painting history all of the Bay Area. My interests were different, and I had a long period of time thinking about architecture, the graphic arts, and so on and so forth, and it was not the art school kind of way at the California School of Fine Arts, because they were getting all these great painters and all from various parts of the States. And I was not taking their classes at all. As I say, I was scrounging around trying to get a job as a commercial artist or as a architect's helper or something of the sort. So it was that aspect of it was different for me. And then when the time went on a while and things changed, and the art world seems to have changed a bit more in my direction, or at least I thought it did.
Well, I call it the 70s were kind of the industrialization of art.
Yes, yeah.
He's in the audience. Dwayne, is he still here?
At the top.
Okay. He was right down the street from me when I finally moved to Venice, and I was just amazed by the setup. It was just incredible, and it seemed like artists were really kind of tooling up in those days.
Yeah.
And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that there was a heavy tech industry here.
Yeah.
So it was just like right at your feet if you knew where to look.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we didn't have the internet then.
Right.
Things would have been probably a lot different.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Should we take questions?
Yeah, anybody got a question?
Does anybody have questions for these master artists?
The master.
Tony, she's asking if the movie they did that you were talking about the aliens was Planet of the Apes.
Oh, I think that was the name of the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah.
Because it was an ape that came after me.
Okay, Suzanne, you had a question.
We didn't see any of Laddie's glass and cement pieces, and I have to say, I practically enjoy going to UCLA to the doctor's offices because they seem to love your work. Makes me feel at home. UCLA is full of your work, so is Cedars. So you're famous in the medical industry.
I really enjoyed making those pieces. You know, they came after the sand. When I showed the sand piece in Europe as well, and when I got back, I was just really tired of making pieces that would last a month. You know, so I started thinking about working with earth materials, and I went to Jack Brogan. I don't know how many people know about Jack Brogan, but he was kind of the technical wizard of the art world. And he worked out a formula for me that I could mix with cement and ground minerals and oxides as pigments. And so I started getting into this thing where I would make pieces that were indigenous to certain areas. And they were an offshoot of the sand pieces.
Anybody else questions?
Here's one.
Pam?
During this time, when California artists were working, how much, you mentioned European artists, Jack, you know, I mean, the New York artists that we all know. How many, when I see this sand piece, it reminds me of Mario Merz.
I knew Mario.
So,
We showed in the same gallery.
oh, I was wondering, you know, how much of an influence some of the European artists and how much contact you had and discussions you had with European artists, was there?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was in Europe a lot, and the Sonnabends were Europeans. And so they also had a gallery in Paris, and also they were very influential in Venice and Milan. So I met a lot of artists from those areas that they showed, including, you know, the people I mentioned before. And I think that as an artist, you're like a sponge. You know, it doesn't mean you have to copy something, but like you take it all in through osmosis somehow. You know, and these elements have an influence on you. That's for sure.
Questions? Yes, sir.
We're very familiar with the pieces that we're seeing on the slides, but just from your student and educational background, you obviously did painting and drawing. What were some of your favorite subject matters in
Well,
painting and drawing?
in painting and drawing, I teach figure drawing. I actually know how to do that. And I was a good student. So the figure, I've never shown the figurative drawings, but I started doing a series of paintings. I actually designed a set for Benjamin Britten's Death in Venice through Connie Glenn, you know, and we showed it at the college. Was it Long Beach? Where Connie is, you know, she kind of put the place on the map. And she was Jack Glenn's ex-wife. And yeah, I just picked up that, you know, whatever, you know, just almost like psychologically or subconsciously.
And Tony, you have a big drawing practice. I mean, your drawings are formally conceived and finished works. He was asking, the gentleman in the audience is asking about drawing, and what is that aspect of your practice? Or
Well, thank you. I think of, well, I don't set out to make a finished drawing. I never really have. I think my nature has always been to use drawing to find something out, maybe in a more plastic sense,
Okay.
such as a painting or sculpture or something of that sort. It seemed like I always felt that I failed more setting out to make a drawing than to just think more about ideas. And I think that ideas can often take a drawing into a natural state.
Into a three-dimensional or, you know,
Yes.
more resolved state.
Yeah, yes.
Which is sculptural.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Eric? Okay, sorry.
Wait, there was one
He's
lady
cutting, we're
up
cutting
there.
off, we're getting cut off.
There will undoubtedly be some more questions.
Sorry.
You can see from the fact that we have continental seating here that it's really difficult to hear questions and to get microphones.
Continental
So,
seating.
given the fact that we started about 20 minutes late and we've gone for the full hour and
Yeah.
are ending about 20 minutes late, I'm going to bring this session to a close now. I would like to join with you, please,
In thanking Tony and Laddie and Gisela for amazing session.